Okay, let's just dive right in. We're starting today with a really stunning international event, the one that drove this entire deep dive. I'm talking about the widespread and frankly disturbing reports of U.S. military strikes in Venezuela. We're hearing about operations right around Caracas, which reportedly culminated in the capture of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. And the reports we have say they were taken into U.S. custody and then transported, believe it or not, to New York.
The sheer audacity of these reported actions is, I think, what hits you first, especially when you pair it with the alleged statements from high-level U.S. officials, including former President Trump. The idea that the U.S. would, temporarily run Venezuela during a transition period and essentially seize control of its immense oil resources. I mean, if you connect this to the broader geopolitical framework, this isn't just a diplomatic crisis. It's a direct, forceful, and I'd say seismic challenge to the entire rules-based international order, the one that's supposed to have governed global conduct since World War II.
And that's the core tension, isn't it? Our sources are really asking us to look past the initial shock and unpack exactly that. This clash between the immediate gut feeling of might is right versus the actual complex reality of international law.
Exactly. Our goal here is to get beyond the headlines. We need to extract a clear, actionable understanding of what international law actually prohibits in a situation like this. And, maybe more importantly, why even the most powerful states still face these significant legal and political restraints. And then, critically bring it back to what other nations, especially those middle and smaller powers, can proactively do to safeguard their sovereignty when something like this is suddenly on the table.
Right, we're digging into the fine print. So before we get to the law itself, let's just nail down the reported facts as our sources have them. We've got reports of unauthorized military strikes on sovereign territory. We've got the capture of a sitting head of state and his spouse. And then the explicit stated intention to temporarily manage the country and seize major national assets, specifically the oil.
And all of this happened, and this is the crucial part, without the public consent of Venezuela's government. That's the legal friction point right there. The global reaction was, as you'd expect, immediate and polarized. It really reflects the gravity of the situation. While some governments might have, let's say, politically cheered the removal of Maduro, our sources universally highlight the global division over how it was done. Many governments across multiple continents came out and severely criticized the unauthorized use of force. That signaled deep, immediate friction with established international norms.
The optics alone are just devastating. So here's where it gets really interesting for me. Why does this event, this specific event, immediately feel like the absolute triumph of might is right to so many people?
It's a perfect storm of power asymmetry. I mean, it's a visual demonstration of unilateralism. You have the world's strongest military power using force against a significantly weaker state. That's part one. Part two, you have the capture of a sovereign leader, an act that, historically, is usually either an internal coup or a declared act of war.
And no UN sign-off.
And as we know, no publicly announced UN Security Council authorization was in place. So when you see force used that overtly, followed by statements about running the country and seizing its resources, well, the immediate conclusion for most people is that raw power, not law, is what's determining the outcome here. It just looks like an act of force that's completely outside of global legal accountability.
Okay, but let's step back for a second and look at the rule book, the one everyone theoretically signed up to. For you, our listener, who might not be an international law specialist, let's just define that first. When we talk about the rules-based international order, what exactly are we talking about?
At its simplest, we're talking about the global governance system that was put in place primarily after World War II. It was meant to replace the older system where, frankly, power alone dictated boundaries. This new system says that global conduct is governed by agreed-upon treaties, institutions, and norms. And the centerpiece of all of that is the UN Charter. It's supposed to be a shift from, the law of the jungle to codified legal structures.
So, if the UN Charter is the foundation, let's unpack this legally. What specific articles or principles did our sources say were basically shredded by these reported actions in Venezuela?
The sources are unanimous on this. Two core principles were violated, and they really are the bedrock of the post-war order. The first is sovereignty and territorial integrity. This just means every state, no matter its size, has the absolute right to govern itself within its own borders without outside interference.
This border is sacred.
The border is sacrosanct. And the second, which is most relevant to the military strikes, is the prohibition on the use of force. That's laid out in Article 2 for the UN Charter.
And what does that prohibition explicitly say? Can a country ever use force?
It's very strict. Military force against another state is fundamentally prohibited. Unless one of two incredibly high bars is met. First, genuine self-defense after an armed attack has already occurred, which did not happen here. Venezuela did not attack the U.S. Second, the use of force has to be explicitly authorized by the UN Security Council.
Right. And as our sources confirmed, no Security Council authorization was publicly reported for this. So on the face of it, the action seems clearly illegal under foundational international law, which raises that huge question, the one the critique asked us to challenge. If the law is so black and white and a powerful state just seems to ignore it, does that mean international law is dead? Is it just a piece of paper?
And that is the ultimate pragmatic question, isn't it? We have to face it head on. But here's the key divergence we need to look at. Just because a law is broken, that does not mean the law ceases to exist. International law is resilient precisely because violating it comes with significant, lasting consequences and restraints.
But hold on. Practically speaking, the U.S. reportedly achieved its immediate goal. Maduro is captured, they've secured the oil even if it's temporary. Didn't the law just fail to deter the action?
That's a valid point about short-term gains, but we have to look at the long-term price tag. And the price for unilateral action is immense. This is not just a political slap on the wrist. When a state acts outside the UN framework, it immediately opens the door to coordinated diplomatic and economic retaliation.
Can you give some concrete examples of what those costs look like?
Certainly. I mean, if we look at historical precedents of unauthorized intervention, the costs include immediate and coordinated sanctions packages. And not just from rivals, but from allies too. We're talking about the freezing of assets held abroad, not just state assets, but potentially the assets of companies involved in, say, the seizure of that Venezuelan oil. And beyond that, this action can cause a sharp, immediate deterioration of vital trade agreements and alliances.
So Europe, for example.
Europe, for example, might immediately signal its displeasure by stalling crucial trade negotiations or pulling back on development aid. This forces the powerful state to spend massive diplomatic capital just managing the fallout, resources that could have been used somewhere else.
So even if the military objective is achieved in, say, 72 hours, that state then spends years, maybe decades, dealing with a legitimacy deficit and damaged global relationships.
Exactly, and that's why even the most powerful states often seek legitimacy. They'll try to build broad coalitions or get retroactive UN resolutions. Because operating outside those frameworks just makes the temporary win exponentially more expensive in the long run. That immediate global condemnation we saw from governments across Europe, Latin America, Asia, Africa, that criticism is the mechanism that generates those long-term costs. They are pointing to the violated law and confirming the action is illegitimate.
Which connects to the ultimate consequence, that fear of setting a dangerous precedent. What are global leaders really worried about when they see this?
They are worried about the erosion of the rules that protect them. The primary fear is the irreversible weakening of the whole rules-based order. If a major power shows it can just ignore the rules, it teaches the world a very dangerous lesson.
That the UN Charter is optional.
That the UN Charter is optional. And that makes smaller states feel profoundly less secure.
It's the classic slippery slope argument. If the US can do this in Venezuela, who's next?
Precisely. If one powerful country acts outside the law, it gives every other country, ones with regional ambitions or unresolved border disputes, a ready-made justification. They can just point to the Venezuela action and say, well, you did it first, so the rule is dead, and we are now free to act outside of international law as well. And that right there is the license for global instability that is the biggest fear of the international community.
Okay, so let's pivot from the problem to the solution. If the security guarantee of international law seems fragile at times like this, what does this all mean for other nations, especially the middle or weaker powers watching this? If you're running a small country's foreign policy desk right now, how do you realistically protect your sovereignty?
Our sources actually provide a wealth of information on proactive strategies here. And the core message is that sovereignty protection today is less about tanks and more about diplomatic and economic shrewdness.
All right, let's get into the actionable steps. What's the #1 defense mechanism that the sources recommend?
It is absolutely to strengthen alliances. And this means moving beyond simple bilateral treaties. It means joining multilateral organizations, whether that's a regional bloc like the African Union, ECOWAS, or ASEAN. Joining these groups creates collective security.
How does that actually deter a powerful aggressor, though, in practice?
It creates a deterrent multiplier. If you're a single small state, you're an easy target. But if you're part of, say, ASEAN, your defense isn't just your military. It's the combined economic and diplomatic weight of 10 or 15 other nations who are now bound by charter to support you. An attack on one becomes an economic complication with many.
And what about the legal avenues, the ones that seem to fail when the military action actually happens?
That's the second key strategy. Using legal and diplomatic tools proactively, not reactively. Governments need to be highly active in global forums. This means working tirelessly through bodies like the UN General Assembly, where there is no veto to pass resolutions condemning specific types of unauthorized force. It also involves seeking international legal judgments. By constantly building and reinforcing these global norms against unlawful force, you are essentially increasing the legal and political price tag on any future aggressor before they even act.
So the goal isn't just to stop an invasion in the moment, but to make sure that if they do invade, 150 nations are immediately lined up with court documents and resolutions to impose consequences.
Precisely. You shift the battleground from kinetic force to political and legal legitimacy, which even powerful nations need to function on a global scale.
We can't forget the internal component, though. What's the third strategy for self-protection?
Internal strength is non-negotiable. The third strategy is to build economic and military resilience. A strong, diversified economy is just less vulnerable to coercion or targeted sanctions. If your economy isn't dependent on a single resource or a single trading partner, you have far more leverage. And coupled with that, you need capable, modernized defense forces. Not necessarily to win a war against a superpower, but forces capable of inflicting high costs. That provides essential deterrence.
That makes perfect sense. Reducing dependencies seems to be the key. What are the last two strategies? They're focused on relationships, right?
They are. They focus on strategic balance. Fourth is to maintain strategic partnerships. Middle powers really need to avoid exclusive reliance on any single major power. By balancing relations with multiple powers, the US, China, Europe, Russia, you reduce dependency. This makes it much harder for any one of them to coerce you because they know such an action might just drive you straight into the arms of a rival.
It's a hedging strategy against vulnerability.
It is. And the fifth strategy is often overlooked, but it's extremely powerful. Invest in soft power. Soft power is the ability to shape what others want through attraction, not coercion. By consistently being a state that champions international law, multilateralism, and leading coalitions that reinforce these norms, you make using force against you less politically appealing.
So, if you're seen as a good global citizen,
if you're seen as a reliable, law-abiding partner, the political cost of invading you is just far higher than invading a pariah state.
Okay, so if I'm Bolivia watching this unfold, what's the most immediate, low-cost diplomatic tool I should use right now, based on these strategies?
The immediate low-cost move is to work through your regional blocs, like the Organization of American States or the UN General Assembly. Issue strong, collective statements condemning the specific breach of territorial integrity. This reinforces your alliances and uses those diplomatic tools at the same time. You're signaling to the world your commitment to the rules, and you're immediately raising the political temperature on the aggressor.
This has been incredibly clarifying. So, to bring it all back together, we started with these shocking reports of unilateral action, the strikes, the capture, the intent to seize oil, which all seem to confirm that might is right.
But our deep dive shows that international law still exists. It is not dead. But its enforcement relies heavily on political will and collective consensus. The reported unilateral action, while maybe effective in the short term, is heavily disputed legally and immediately triggered massive reputational and political consequences around the world.
And the essential takeaway for other countries watching this is that protection relies not just on military strength, but on shrewd external strategy. Strong alliances, proactive legal moves, and building economic resilience. Violating sovereignty is still extremely costly in the long game.
The complexity of global governance really means that short-term power plays often come at the expense of long-term legitimacy.
So, given that U.S. leaders reportedly said they would run Venezuela for a temporary transition period, here's a final provocative thought for you to explore. What is the ultimate geopolitical cost of gaining temporary control through force if that very action simultaneously destroys the fundamental international norms like non-intervention and sovereignty that all major powers need to ensure long-term global stability and their own legitimacy? Something to think about long after the headlines fade.